Across the wire late Monday night. I mean, Fight Night Picks, the video, the full card thing, it comes out Monday morning, and all of a sudden, Mateusz Rebecki, he has a next opponent. Out was Nurulo Aliyev over the weekend. And listen, he wanted to do the Drizzy Drake like in 2015. Got the Drake in me going back to back. He wanted to beat back to back Tajikistan fighters. Unfortunately for Rebecki, the dream is quashed. He gets an unlikely short notice draw, and one that a lot of UFC fans recognize. A guy who went 4-3 with a no contest in his time with the promotion. It is, of course, a name that Matt Allen has struggled to pronounce for years. Roosevelt the Predator Roberts, off of the Ultimate Fighter season 31. He was a quarterfinalist on the season, a veteran, of course. So he's Team Michael Chandler. But Matt, I mean, I threw this one out there, put the graphics together. They look silly, right? Like they really do. It's a 7-inch height advantage, 7-inch reach advantage for Roosevelt Roberts in this matchup. The fans, most of them really recognize this guy. Of course, when you have 8 fights in the UFC, people are going to know who you are. They're going to know you for the good things, like when he went on a 14-fight unbeaten streak from his amateur time to his pro. He won on Dana White's Contender Series 2018. He gets a submission win there as a giant favorite. He beats Daryl Horcher out of the UFC. Habib's Daryl Horcher. He beats Daryl Horcher out of the UFC. He then goes on to beat Thomas Gifford. Poor Thomas. He had a rough run in the UFC. Set him up for a Beast Boy fight. That one went poorly. But if you look at it for Roberts, he kind of bounced around. And you might say, okay, well, one loss, maybe it's forgivable. The Vince Pichel fight, it's really close. But if you do dig into it, you look at the last 3 fights that Roberts had in the UFC. It's a loss to Jim Miller as a 3-1 favorite. He slips on a kick, and Jim Miller, the veteran that he is, jumps in on top. Roberts ends up switching the position, and as he's getting up just a half second too long, he leaves his arm in there. He goes to slam Miller, and he gets submitted in the armbar, and it's like a verbal submission. You see a no contest on his record. Alleged not great guy, Kevin Kroom. Taking on Kevin Kroom. He's going tit for tat, but he throws that speedy 1-2 that he has down the pipe. Kroom, duck under, overhand left, drops Roberts. And as Roberts goes to get back up, it's a guillotine finish, performance bonus. But Kevin Kroom, a little bit of that devil's lettuce in his system. And then you look at the ultimate loss in the end. He loses to Ignacio Bahamondes. It's knockout of the year contender back a few years ago. So Roberts in around the apex, not the greatest record. He goes outside of the UFC, becomes the lights out welterweight champ. He gets a win over your guy, Matt, Darren Smith Jr. How does he knock him out? Double jab, right cross, knocks him out. He ends up getting that fight against, who was it? Alessandro Almeida over with Eagle FC, who was on a 2.5-year layoff, a former PFL vet, beats him by decision, ends up on the Ultimate Fighter, first episode. And people are like, why is this first episode so long? And where's the fight? It's because the fight was over in the first 10 seconds. He's going up against Nate Jennerman. People on the regional scene in the States, they know Nate. You get to learn about how he's leaving his family to be on the show, and it's so sad. Then he gets knocked out by what? You guessed it, speedy 1-2. So if you know Roosevelt Roberts, a great 1-2, it is magical. And I wrote this down on my page, Matt. I wrote, if you look at Rebecki, you look at Roosevelt Roberts, for striking finesse, I have Mateusz Rebecki at a 4. But I'd say Roosevelt Roberts is at a 7. He's above average. He's got really streaky shots. He is a really streaky fighter, and that can be good and that can be bad. He's a Svechnikov of fighting if he was a hockey player. For power, Rebecki's at a 7. Roosevelt Roberts is about a 5, 4.5, a 5. Wrestling, Rebecki's an 8. Roberts is a 3. Grappling, Rebecki is a 7. Roberts is a 5 because he's a good grappler. He's just not a great wrestler. And cardio, Roberts is probably a 7 for cardio. Rebecki's a 4.5 for cardio, even though 15 fights in a row, the former FEN lightweight champ is Rebecki, and he had 8 title fights over with that organization. So as we do this over Zoom, Matt, for the people, don't forget to unmute yourself. But I know you got a lot to unpack on this fight.
Well, it is a really interesting fight because Roberts was a fighter who, you bring up how many fights he had in the UFC. It was more than I've remembered initially, right? Because it did feel like he only had a couple performances, because you remember the highlights at some points, because he is a really nice upright kind of a striker. And when things are clicking, you do see the positives of all of his game. And you bring it up. The wrestling might not be great, but he has a lot more submissions on his record than you probably assume when you go out there and just watch him fight, and especially flow on the feet, because he is that really tall, upright, can use his boxing very well. But I do like the defensive submissions, and that's going to be really important, I think, in this matchup, because he's not going to win the outright wrestling exchanges in this fight, right? I think everybody can agree on that. But if he can make Rebecki at least uncomfortable going for some of those takedowns, but make him work in the same effort, then I think it might work out for Roberts as this fight continues. But the problem was with Roberts, if you're not wrestling him, and if you do just use that close range, even with your own boxing, he can even struggle in that spot too. So I think his defense is really going to have to be important in this fight, not only with the wrestling, but striking as well. Because if Rebecki does start to tire going for a very high volume of takedowns, and let's say he is able to get some of them, right, but Roberts is able to make it uncomfortable for him on the ground, maybe work his way back up to the feet, Roberts will be the fresher guy as this fight goes on. And if he's able to land clean shots on the outside, he might really make him uncomfortable as this fight continues, because Roberts, I think, was a prospect that a lot of people were excited in, but we just started to see some of the negatives pile up until it was like, okay, we might need to see him kind of go down to NXT, if you will, to put it into WWE terms. And I do think for Roberts, there is a chance for him to get back on that track, because there were some really nice positives in that first run for sure.
Now, what was the fight that we didn't talk about? This is the reason why I was positive about the fight. I like Roosevelt Roberts. I really do. He was one of those guys, Matt. Like, again, we talk about Jamall Emmers all the time. Well, a couple of years ago, we were always talking about Roosevelt Roberts. He's
for sure
good with the submissions. He's a really good striker. He's speedy. He's got a little bit of power, picks his power shots, whatever. Trains at Kill Cliff FC with some of the best in the world. Same thing for Rebecki, training at American Top Team. Rebecki's a tricky southpaw. You saw the leg kick his last time out against Loic Radzhabov. That was the issue. He dropped him in the first round with the leg kick. You saw the takedown that he was able to get in a little bit of a guillotine that Radzhabov threw up. But again, you remember Rebecki, his fight on Contender Series, he's able to get that no hook kind of body crank, rear naked choke submission win that I don't think we'd ever seen over Rodrigo Lidio. You look at the fight against Nick Fiore, that one's on short notice. Fiore accepts that fight. He's a grappler in his own right. You remember the huffing and the puffing as it went on from Rebecki. So something that you worry about on a short notice fight. Will be interested to see who weighs in where for this one. And if it is possibly at a catch weight, I don't think it is. But again, this is really short notice as we break this one down. And when you look at a guy, again, it's comical, the height, the reach difference. The big thing for me when I do look at this one, again, double jab, right cross for Roberts. Rebecki, he cuts the cage really well for his kind of stocky and as lunging as he can be. He knows where to be with his foot position. Again, a champion from FEN when he was over there in Poland, in Europe. He had beaten Marian Jelkowski. I'll talk about that one forever because that's a win that really matters. That guy is like UFC fringe material. And I know he's been off for a long time. The belt, it went to Saladin Palmas because of the injuries, but Jelkowski's one of those guys. But the fight that we didn't talk about, that's what got us on the tangent. Austin Hubbard fight in the semifinals to move into the finals to win your shot back into the UFC. I don't get why this is even a thing. I would figure that Roosevelt Roberts would have to have another fight. You might go, Craig, why? Go watch that fight. It is one of the worst fights I've ever watched in my entire life. It's not Francis Ngannou, Derek Lewis, but these two guys are teammates. They're buddies. And they had a glorified sparring session if I've ever seen one. Nobody was willing to engage. Again, it's a 29-28 win for Austin Hubbard. But if you do watch that fight, Matt, and I'd like to get your thoughts on it, like it left such a bad taste in my mouth. I know it was negative when Hubbard ended up getting his shot against Kurt Hollabaugh on the finals of the Ultimate Fighter. Split decision loss for Roosevelt Roberts. Again, when I watched it the first time, I thought, oh, I do think Roberts has a pretty good case. When I went back and watched it today, I thought, yeah, again, I think Roberts had a pretty good case of winning that, but that was one of the worst fights. And for Hausch Manfiao to have that happen in the PFL in a big spot against Natan Schultz here recently, and they let kind of Manfiao walk, so to speak, here in the last couple of weeks, I'm surprised that this is even an opportunity that's materialized. Roosevelt Roberts must have the best manager in the entire world.
All the fighters in the UFC now are from Contender Series. You're really surprised? Like, they signed anyone, and this guy had a decent name at one point. Like, I do like in Roosevelt Roberts a little bit too, and it's not exactly the same. Mark Chikasi had a similar career path at one point, right? It was, we have all these positives, we're really excited about you, but then we saw you stumble. And for Chikasi, we saw him at least turn to the wrestling and make those big improvements in that part of his game. Now, and we both said this a lot, has he turned too far into that side of his game? That might be a conversation to have. that. But that would be nice if we could see Roberts at least incorporate more of the wrestling, be it defensively, and maybe even open up some more of his offensive wrestling, because I think that's what this fight comes down to more than anything. I know we bring up the cardio concerns and how this fight probably does favor Roberts as it continues, but if he's spending the majority of the first round and second round on his back, working to get back up to his feet, well, he's also going to be burning quite a bit of energy in a situation like that. And I just don't know if he's going to have the same type of advantage if the fight goes late, if he's forced to just be trying to get up off his back the whole entire fight.
Rebecki's one of those guys. He's corked up like a Sammy Sosa bat in 2003.
He's got huge power for the size. Like, he is the most compact guy you will ever see. He really is.
A stiffer John Lineker in the southpaw stance, if there ever was one. Matt, we do look at this one again. You saw the leg kicks out of Rebecki's last time out. You saw him as a champ with FEN. You can find the tape very readily available, and you'll remember the injury to Loic Radzhabov's leg from those kicks. But you'll also remember, if you look down at the left foot of Rebecki, it is busted at the toes. It is blowing up. Like if you saw me this past summer on Twitter, my foot after I got stung by that wasp. Things got bad, Matt. 629 total votes on Tapology, 93% Rebecki, 71% by knockout. For the 7% that have Roberts, 56% by knockout. I kind of agree with what you said at the start of the video. I think if Roberts is going to get the win, look out for those defensive submissions. I mean, Rebecki's one of those guys that puts himself into everything. And by that, it's a double-edged sword. He really does go out there, put everything into his takedowns, put everything into his strikes. He can tire himself out, or those big actions, they can win him the fights. And so far, it's won him, 15 in a row. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I think on a full camp, Matt, honestly, and I'm not fibbing here, I would think this is a really close fight. I am going to edge with Rebecki because he was getting ready for a grappler in Nurullo Aliyev. So I think game plan, you would think he would still grapple against a guy like Roberts, as he would have most likely against Aliyev, even though that's Aliyev's big thing. And sometimes when it's grappler versus grappler, you end up seeing some striking from one of those guys. But I would think that Rebecki would go back to the grappling. So I will take him in this fight. I think he's got a pretty big advantage there. But again, when it comes to striking finesse on a guy that can go 15 hard minutes on the outside, I mean, round the outside, Roosevelt Roberts.
I think it's going to be a tough fight for Roberts. I really do. I think the wrestling's going to be difficult for him to fend off. And the thing is, how is he going to be able to make up for it once he is able to create that separation? Because, okay, let's say you do defend the takedown. Well, now you need to spend another 30 seconds getting this guy off of you, so then you can create that distance to land your own offense. There's just a lot of moments he's going to have to capitalize on if he does end up ultimately winning this fight. But I do agree with your pick in the end. I do have Rebecki.
It's lightweight on the sites. Look at these two guys weighing in on Friday. We'll be sure to cover it on Question Mark Kicks. Matt, you know what? This week, we're going to throw this one out. This is the individual video of the week. If there's any other additions, you can catch those individual videos here on the channel. But this is going to be the one that you're going to see. So, Matt, some big-time fights on this card. You can check them out on that full card video here on the channel. As always, at Matt Allen FNP, at Craig Allen FNP. We're touring around this week. We're not in our usual digs, but you can find us here, as always, on the YouTubes. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, let's get into it.